Alors, nous sommes très, très heureuses de lancer ce festival, enfin, ou en tout cas de pouvoir le faire en numérique. Et nous accueillons alors Nancy Warren, qui est en haut à gauche, Annie West, que tout le monde connaît bien, et Nancy Herkness. Et l'exploit qu'on a, qu'on réalise aujourd'hui, c'est qu'on a 17 heures de décalage entre toutes les quatre. Et voilà. So I introduced the three of you, and I precise that there was 17 time difference between all of us. It's quite a performance. And so let's begin the conference on the contemporary romance. So first of all, I'll let you introduce yourself. And then we'll ask some questions. Maybe Nancy Herkness, you can begin.
Bonjour, je m'appelle Nancy Herkness. I've had 17 books published. I am with Montlake at the moment, which is a division of Amazon Publishing. I've had 5 novels and 1 novella published by J'ai Lu en français, Vive la France. Et je suis très heureuse d'être ici avec vous tous. Merci.
Merci. Annie?
Hi, I'm Annie West. I live in Australia where it's currently pouring with rain. I love coming to the festivals in Paris, I have to say, so I was absolutely thrilled to be asked to do this online. I write contemporary romance. I write short contemporary romance for Harlequin, and I have a book to show you.
Yes.
So my books look like that. That's one coming out this month in English, or in France, they look like this, that sort of cover. So I write short and I also have self-published some stories. I write shorter contemporary romance with lots of passion and drama.
Yeah. And Nancy Warren?
Hello, bonjour. I'm Nancy Warren. I live in Canada, in British Columbia, where it's springtime now and very, very beautiful. I used to write for Harlequin, and I'm now almost completely self-published. I write contemporary romance, and I also write cozy mystery, and I am just having my first cozy mysteries published in France under the name, just a minute, it's the Vampire Knitting Club in English, and I think it's Le Club des Vampires Tricoteurs.
Tricote, oui, that's it.
Tricote, oui. So there we are. So that's me.
Okay. So maybe the first question is, can you tell us how did you begin to write contemporary romance? Maybe Nancy Herkness.
Me again?
Yes.
No, me. Well, I write contemporary romance because I'm lazy, basically. I love reading historical romance, but I don't want to do the research. So I mean, I'm joking slightly here, but I enjoy exploring the themes and cultural events of our current day life. And I think that's what contemporary romance does, is, you know, very much focuses on what's going on now and how I feel about that and how it affects my characters. So I think that's the real reason that I write contemporary.
Okay. Who wants to go?
Well, I will. I write it because it's what I love to read. When I started reading romance, I was reading a lot of contemporary and historical. I still love to read both, and also romantic suspense I love to read. But the one I kept coming back to all the time, the one that really makes me feel the emotion, is that contemporary romance. And so it was where that was what was calling me. I still love it.
agree. And I think when I started writing contemporary, what I love about it is these are stories about women. There are stories, and the women always win at the end. And I've always loved romantic comedy. I still love romantic comedy movies. And I think, you know, when I think about the people I know and the stories I have written, or the people I've known in real life, falling in love is never easy. It's always bumpy, and so many ridiculous things happen. And so I love writing romantic comedy, because, you know, who doesn't love to laugh? And yet at the end, the right people end up together, which is what we celebrate.
Mm-hmm. What transformation have you seen or heard of since you began to write?
I'll answer that one. So my first book was published in 2003.
Mm-hmm.
There was no self-publishing back then. So the huge transformation that I have lived through as a writer is the self-publishing revolution. Mm-hmm. And I think what's been tremendous about that is that it has allowed books that have small niche markets mm-hmm. to become published and to be available to readers, because in the old days you didn't get those. And I also love the fact that writers combine subgenres now, you know, in ways that, again, were not permitted when, you know, only the large traditional publishers decided which books were published. So I would say the self-publishing revolution has just been massive for writers. Wouldn't you guys agree?
Yes, I think so. Maybe Annie or Nancy.
Yeah, I think also if you look at the other big disruption, look at the way, you know, frankly, romance has changed. I mean, this is my 20th year in publishing, so I was a little bit before you, Nancy. I started, my first book came out in 2001. And, you know, now if I go back, because I've got the rights back to some of my early books, and I read them, I'm like, it's like a different world. You know, we forget in 20 years the way things have changed and the way women approach romance and couples. And there's so many, you know, we're celebrating so many different kinds of romance too, very openly, which I think is a really beautiful thing. So yeah, it's an ever-changing landscape. And that's why the stories at their heart are always the same, but the way we dress them up is so different. And that's so much fun in our genre.
Absolutely. Okay. They change over time, don't they?
Mm-hmm.
And I think too, both readers and authors have a lot more choice these days. There are so many more places that you can get published, and there are so many more places you can buy books. The other thing that I've noticed too is when I started writing, I used to get emails, but I used to get a lot more written letters from fans. You know, I'd have readers from around the world writing to me. Nowadays, I get a lot more emails or Facebook messages and that sort of thing. And I think a lot more readers are willing to take that step to contact an author, because I don't know whether they perceive that we're more accessible. But that seems to have been a change too, which I really like. It's really great having conversations with readers.
Yeah, I agree, Annie. Social media has actually, I think, been terrific. I love interacting with my readers. I'm a big Facebook person, and you really do. Now you get a community, which you didn't have available to you before. So I think that's such a good point. And it's very exciting for a writer, I think.
Yes.
I like it anyway.
It's exciting for us readers too. It's a good transition, because does your publisher or your readers ask you to write more or less contemporary romance books? What do they ask?
My publisher, the only thing my publisher's ever asked me to do.
Oops. I'm sorry, the connection is
another. Oh, sorry. Can you hear me?
No.
Okay.
Yes.
I didn't hear your answer. Sorry. Can you?
Oh, I just was saying the only thing my publishers ever asked me to do is write faster.
Yes.
They they like contemporary romance. I started adding suspense elements to my straight contemporary romance, but not because my publisher asked me, just because I was interested in doing that.
Okay. So
yeah, I find my editor basically leaves it to me. I talk to my editor and say, I'm thinking of writing a story about, well, I've just written a bodyguard story. So I'm thinking about writing a story about a couple and he's a bodyguard. And she goes, oh, well, hopefully she goes, oh. That's about as far as it goes. Occasionally we'll discuss themes that I might do well or that might be selling well, but no, it's pretty much up to me.
okay.
And of course, since I'm my own publisher, I make all the decisions, but I have a very active reader group and they're very, 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 very clear about what they want and what they don't want. And I'm sure this happens to you guys too. It's like your book just comes out and I'm like, oh, thank goodness. And then within 3 hours, I'll get the first email. Oh, I loved it. I can't wait for the next one. I always think, could I maybe have lunch first?
back to the keyboard immediately.
That is such a nice thing, isn't it, Nancy?
It is. It's lovely. And we're very blessed with our readers. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay. So what is your daily routine as an author? And did it change with the pandemic?
I want to hear about Nancy Warren's because I can't believe how many books you put out.
Well, I'll tell you what, the pandemic has been very good for productivity, hasn't it? Like there is nothing else to do. All these, you know, I travel so much and I love coming to Paris to your beautiful conference and going to other conferences around the world. And now I can't do that. So yeah, my routine is, I try to write 3,000 words a day. I don't always do it, but I try to get 3,000 words a day done. Yeah. And that's all I do. I'm so bored.
Okay.
And yeah.
Do you take weekends off?
I'm not very good at schedules. I more have days where I just don't feel like writing. And if I don't feel like writing, I will grab a book or go for a walk or something. But yeah.
And do you allocate a certain part of your day for marketing and things like that? Because obviously it's being self-published, you have to do that too.
I think that's the bulk of the work, right? Is the marketing administration. Absolutely. And now I'm doing translations and there's that and audio. And it's like, yeah, there's a lot of balls in the air at any one time, but I don't know, it's fun. And, you know, people who are saying, oh, I've been so bored in lockdown. Honestly, I wish. I'm like, I'm off in my happy little world with vampires in Oxford or, you know, writing romance in Oregon. And it's like, I'm happy. I'm traveling in my head.
Yeah.
How about you guys?
Okay, so maybe let's have some questions about the characters. What qualities or maybe flaws should the main characters have? How old should they be in a contemporary romance?
Well, it's funny you ask about the age because being older myself, I'm always pushing my characters older. And my agent and I actually had a discussion one day about what was the maximum age I could make my characters, because I was talking about, I did not end up writing this book, but talking about writing one where the heroine was significantly older than the hero. And somehow we came up with the arbitrary number of 42. The heroine could be 42. I don't know why, but so that's all I know about age.
I think there's an interesting, there's a whole genre now of older women, you know, and older women romance and divorced women fiction. And I think because, you know, our demographic is changing, and there's a, you know, when I started writing 20 years ago, I was a younger woman and my interests were different. And I think a lot of us, right, we're all kind of aging up, and so are our readers. And so I think there's a really strong interest in older women finding romance and love again. You know, we're not just being put on the shelves and forgotten about, which is kind of exciting. But I think people can be any age. It just has to fit your story.
That's right. And it's interesting. I have a critique partner. We've known each other for years, and I write a story and I'll have the hero and heroine in my mind. But if I don't actually write down their specific age, she always comes back and says, but how old are they? How old are they? I'm thinking, well, you could guess. Because mine are always sort of within a range. And I do find a lot of, for the line that I write, which is fairly specific, I don't think writing a 45-year-old heroine or even a 42-year-old heroine is going to be as appealing to a lot of the readers. Some will like it, but not all. So I tend to write younger than that. I think for me, the main thing is that none of my characters are perfect, but they have to be redeemable. There was a stage, as I said, I started reading romance when I was very young, and then I stopped reading them for a while when the heroes got incredibly bossy, take charge, almost brutal. And then, and I'm sure there are some still like that, but then the things changed again. And so I will often write a hero, for instance, and the heroine, that doing the wrong thing, but they think they're doing the right thing. They're not bossy or mean or difficult just because they're like that. They're reacting to certain circumstances and they think they're doing the right thing for some good reason. So you have to be able to redeem them, to show that they're basically the sort of person that your hero or your heroine is going to be safe and happy with for the rest of their lives. Okay. So to me, that's the key. Flawed, but not totally flawed.
Yeah, I think if you explain their sort of baggage, if you want to call it that, the backstory has to be clear enough that their flaws are sympathetic and comprehensible, to us as the writer and the reader. So yeah, and definitely they have to be redeemable because
Yes, I don't want to read a book where the character falls in love with someone who is going to make them miserable for the rest of their life. That's just not going to work.
Okay. So what is the best match, hero, heroine? A strong hero or equals, enemies, I don't know, opposites?
I love enemies to lovers. That's one of my favorites. So and especially because I write a lot of romantic comedy. So those people that are like, they're just so wrong and they're so right. I think those are really fun. In my opinion, both should be strong because you get to what Annie was talking about. You don't want that imbalance of power. So I always think, maybe perhaps in different ways, but both characters should be very strong.
Okay. I'd agree. And even one of the things I love writing, it's not every book, but some books, they are both strong characters, but at the beginning of the book, one appears to have all the power and one appears to have no power at all. And there's this terrible imbalance between the two. I love writing that because through the book, they even up like this. And particularly, unlike you, Nancy, I love writing enemies to lovers. I don't always do it, but it's something I come back to because I love that clash, that passion, that emotion, those scenes write themselves sort of thing. And I love it through the book when the characters realise they are equals and they respect each other. It's such fun. It's so satisfying. I love reading those.
What about you, Nancy? Herkness?
Oh, I totally agree. I like Beauty and the Beast too. That's a great trope. I don't think I've ever written one, but one of these days I'm going to. But yeah, so one of my series is, actually quite a few books are billionaire romances. And of course, billionaires appear to have all the power because of their economic power. And my heroines are sort of every woman. And so it's the same thing. It looks like this terrible imbalance, but of course, the billionaires are always missing sort of the human touch, and that's what the heroine brings to them. And yes, strong heroines are a must for me. So totally in agreement with that.
Okay. Is it important to have second characters, best friends, parents, I don't know, relatives?
Well, I love writing secondary characters. That's one of my favorite things. I get a little frustrated when I have to write short, like novella length, and you can't really fit in a lot of secondary characters because I think secondary characters are always a comment on the hero and heroine. You know, who you surround yourself with obviously makes a difference. And it also is a wonderful way to show how other people view the hero and the heroine, which opens up, you know, how so it can create misunderstandings. It can create clarity for the other character when they're looking at the main character. So I think, and I just think vivid, you can sort of play more with secondary characters too. You get more age range. You can, you know, it's just, I just think it opens up a book, and it's a lot of fun if you have the space to do it. So how about you, Annie? Do you have room for secondary characters in the Harlequin books?
No, not often, because I write, I mean, the books are only
right.
So about 50 to 55,000 words. There isn't space for a lot of secondary characters. And I do remember my first editor, I was writing my third book, something like that. And she said, you haven't got room for so many characters. You have to cut out at least 2, because she wanted the focus totally on the hero and heroine. So I managed to fudge my way through that. So the secondary characters I have are usually absolutely necessary. And I agree, Nancy, with what you're saying about other people in the story informing you about your hero and heroine, and giving you another perspective on them. So often my secondary characters will be off the page, or you'll only see them for a short period. Presents, the line I write for, is notorious for having orphans, because you kill off lots of characters. You don't have lots of family members, because you put your, I often put my heroine, but sometimes my hero as well, in an awful situation. Now, if they've got a family of 11 that they can go back to, who will go, oh, there, we'll look after you, it's not going to work. So often my characters, even if they're not orphans, they're in a situation where they have to deal with their issues by themselves, or almost by themselves, or maybe they're taking responsibility for someone else. So I love books with that sense of community and lots of characters to give that strength. But I find in mine, the focus is really the hero and the heroine. And what I do find, and this is a little bit like what you were saying, Nancy Warren, if ever I write a story and there's a brother mentioned who's not even in the book, but he's mentioned, or there's someone's secretary or whatever, then get readers saying, oh, is he going to get a book, and is she going to get a book, and what about that? And often, yes, I'm thinking I'd love to write their story, but yeah.
And that is the fun of series, of course, because that's one of the ways that we can do that. And my feeling is, you know, as women, where would we be without our women friends? So I think that for me is a big part of when I think of community. And as you both said, it helps reflect the heroine. It's also where you put all your wacky characters, right? Like that one that wouldn't really make a very good romance heroine, but she's so much fun and she's so crazy and out there. And we all have friends like that. So I like to do that. And then I think, if you can do a series, and you've got, you know, because there's always that, you know, like your book, Annie, the book ends and they're happily ever after, but you're always like, but wouldn't it be nice to like see them a year later? Well, if you have a series, you know, you can kind of bring them back. Oh, look, there's the baby, or oh, look, you know, they just whatever, bought a house or had a fight. Yeah. Oh, we've been upgraded. And
look at that. We're upgraded.
No. Okay. So let's have a few questions about, I think, contemporary romance. This one was suggested by Nancy Herkness. What kind of research do you do when you write the contemporary romance? Do you talk to some specialists or consultants?
Well, Nancy, you better answer it.
Well, I was going to say, the reason I brought the question up is because I think so many people think that only historical writers do research, you know, and that us contemporary people just breeze on through. That's what I was hoping when I started writing contemporary. But I find I do a tremendous amount of research, and I was kind of laughing because I'm inventing a whole fictional country for the series I'm just starting. And you would think you can just make it up, right? But I want it to be plausible and authentic. So I'm finding that I'm having to, you know, look up all sorts of geographical features and architecture, and because you know, when I write about a book in New York, it's easy. I live right near New York. I go there all the time. I don't even have to think about it. I know what the architecture is. But when you're making it up whole cloth, you have to look things up. But I love talking to people about what they do. So when I was reading these books, which are called, this is a consultant series, so they're kind of business oriented, the mysteries. I actually tortured my hair salon, the owner of my hair salon, because I needed to know about small business accounting for this book. And the heroine in this book actually owns a hair salon. So I took her out to lunch, plied her with food, and bombarded her with questions about those, about both the accounting and the hair salon. So, and fortunately, people are awfully generous with their time and willing to talk about it. Don't you guys find that too?
Yeah, I find a lot of my research is to do with locations, but also it might be to do with a medical condition or a legal situation, and people have been so helpful. If I approach someone and say, can you help me with this, or even put something out on the website if anybody knows something about this, and then we'll have a conversation. Incredibly helpful. I once had to work out how long someone would serve in jail in Italy for manslaughter, and it was really difficult because I was in Australia. I don't speak Italian. I had Italian friends trying to check court records. I went to the Italian consulate in Australia. I had all sorts of people, and then of course there was no one right answer. And when it comes to researching locations, I know what you mean, Nancy. I rarely write places I haven't been to myself. I've only done it a couple of times, and the research was, you know, as real, you know, and spoke the language and understood how things worked or whatever. And yeah.
Okay.
How about you, Nancy? What about knitting? Do you do a lot of research knitting? Knitting, Nancy Warren?
Vampire research.
I did, yeah, I've done a lot of that. It's amazing. But yeah, like you guys, I have a lovely group, and I'll say, so if I was going to knit this, what would I do? Or is this a stitch? Or, you know, and they're so lovely. And take a chance to use the set on. And I made up for the very same reason as you. I made up my town because I think it's really important. But then I did a road trip, and I found my town. So there is actually a real town I base it on, but of course I call it something different because, you know, I put in weird people in different places that might not match the actual town. But what's really fun when you do this is then you get other story ideas, right? Like, I mean, I feel like every day on this planet, we're doing research. I'll talk to someone and it'll be like, oh, what an interesting profession. I should write that, you know, research.
Yeah. So what is the best contextual setting? Is it, for example, a family or personal event? Is it at work, or I don't know?
I don't know. Someone else go first.
Yes.
I'm always going first. I don't
well, mine vary. The one thing I will say is that I tend not to write office romances. I've tried. I have actually written 2 office romances. And then when I look back at them, I was lower in the office for about 5% of the story. And the rest of the time, one was set in a Caribbean island and the other one was in the mountains of Italy. And I think it's because I spent many years working in an office, and I don't view them as romantic places. So I think for me, you can set a romance anywhere and it'll work if the characters are right. I remember Valerie Parv, an Australian romance author, years ago saying she had written a romance set in a supermarket or around a supermarket, and it was one of her bestsellers, which, you know, I wouldn't have thought of it. You know, it's the story and the characters. It could be anywhere.
Yes, of course.
Yeah, I agree. Offices are boring. Anyone who's ever worked in one, unless you're doing that. I quite like that, especially, and it's so like inappropriate these days anyway. And so, they're always going to have to sneak around, right? In most office settings, you're going to sneak around, and that can be a source of quite of a joy and amusement. But for me, it usually starts with usually the heroine. I usually see her, she's in a bind, and then I'm like, who is the worst person who could cross her path at this moment? And then my hero is born.
I do exactly the same. Yeah.
That's interesting. I often start with my hero. So go figure.
Well, you're writing Billionaires. That makes sense, right? Like,
well, I did have a female billionaire. My novella in that series is a female billionaire, which was an interesting challenge because of the power dynamic economically. So I had to give her a very powerful hero, but he was a sports star. So that was my way of balancing that.
Okay. I think we've got 7 minutes left. What do you imagine first, or what do you focus on, the love story of the story around the love story? I don't know how to explain it, but
so it's a bit like fashion. The love story is the person. The love story is the center of the story. It has to be if we're writing romance, and then everything else is the dressing, is the costuming. So the setting and the characters, and I feel like everything you're doing, in the way you choose fashion that will accentuate, all the best things about your figure and so on. That's what you do. You're sort of dressing it up. Does that make sense? That was maybe a very poor metaphor. But
yes.
That was all.
Yeah. I find I start with a conflict. I'll start with one or the other character, usually the heroine, in a difficult situation, but there's some sort of conflict, and then I have to work out who the other half of that conflict is, and from there I will usually get the setting built into the conflict and other characters, and everything else follows from it. But I don't start by saying, oh, I want to write a book set here, or I want to write about such and such a person. I start with the conflict every time, and that's knowing the character or the two characters and why they're pushing against each other and pulling apart.
Yeah, I think we're all saying the same thing. I start with the characters myself. Part of my problem is I am not a plotter. I am what we call a pantser. I write by the seat of my pants. So I start with the two characters and their conflicts, as you said, and then I literally start on page 1 and write and see. For me, the fun is seeing what happens between them, right? So there's the characters, their built-in conflict, and then who knows? Who knows what's going to happen? I don't even have an ending in mind. I mean, I laugh because I started writing a little bit of romantic suspense, to sort of hang the plot on. I don't know who the bad guy is when I start the book, which is kind of nuts, but
wow.
I
actually do that in mystery. I don't always know. I don't know
really?
who did it. Yeah. And it's so much fun because if I don't know, the reader's not going to know. Yeah. And then at the end, I'm like, oh, it was you. Okay. And then usually it makes sense. Yeah.
So much becomes clear.
You make me feel so much better about the fact that I don't know who it is at the beginning.
Writing is discovery for some of us. It's just our process, right? Yeah.
Oh, that's great. And so maybe the last question, what advice do you want to give to others who would want to write their first contemporary romance?
Do it. Just do it. Sit down and do it. And it's great fun. And there's this wonderful, wonderful supportive community of other writers who will help you. And now, as we were talking about earlier with social media, there are websites and and especially now, you're locked down anyway. This is a great time to start.
Yes.
I would add, ignore the people who tell you that the way to write is like this. Everybody writes differently. I mean, there's similarities, obviously, sitting here talking to you guys, there are strong similarities in things that we do, but we all have our own processes, and the process might change from one book to another. The best thing to do is read lots and write and keep writing. And the more you write, the more you learn, the easier it gets, sort of.
I was going to say, what? It gets easier?
Well, you know, the more you do it, the more you realize that you can do it, even if you come across a bit of a problem along the way. But, you know, if you just dream of writing and never try it, well, you'll never do it, will you?
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's true. But we say put butt in chair, put hands on keyboard. You've got to go ahead. And I agree with you. I think reading widely is also really important, and reading across all genres. I would not limit myself to contemporary romance, although obviously if that's what you want to write, it's important. But I got the idea the inspiration, not really the idea, for the series I'm working on from a science fiction series that I read. You know, it inspired me to do something different. So, you know, be eclectic in your reading too.
Okay. So thank you very much. Merci beaucoup. On est dans les temps en plus. We're just in time. So I think there was some small cuts of the connection. I watch it, and I hope it won't be a problem, but I'll tell you.
Well,
Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you.
It's been lots of fun.
Et à bientôt, à l'année prochaine. Next year.
Yes, and next time in Paris.
Yes.
Thank you for the great questions too. They were super.
And thanks for staying up so late to talk to us.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh my goodness.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
It was a pleasure. Bye-bye.
Really nice.
Bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Keep well. See you later.